Welcome to RMM Help. In this session we look at issuing equipment using the request option in the equipment library module in RMM. We find that in the Assets section and in Actions Library System. It's worth mentioning at this point that all requests and returns into the library can be achieved using a barcode scanner, and that speeds up the operation and improves accuracy. We can also work with you on implementing RFID tagging if that's more appropriate. The system automatically opens in the default library, and in our case it's the medical equipment library. So operation of the system is primarily requests, that's booking equipment out on loan, and returns, bringing equipment back into the library pool. And you'll remember from the setup tutorial we discussed each library item having a status which is typically on loan or available. When we use the request option to book an item out, the form opens at our default library, so I'll go to request. It's opened that in our default library, and all of the equipment status here, if I move across, has a status of available. Just before we look at the request option, it's worth mentioning the automatic transaction record, which is allocated on each transaction. So a request or a return, a change of status, they all have a reference, a loan reference, a request reference, and so on. And that reference is only for audit purposes. It appears on the asset detail form and on the equipment activity list, which is the report that you'd utilize for an audit of your library transactions. So we'll book an item out using this request option, and you'll notice that the form is split here. It displays static information at the top relating to the asset, the model, serial number and type, etc. And we can find our assets by me scanning a barcode now while it's in Asset ID, or alternatively I could use the filter row. I could use the built-in filters here for status, asset ID, asset type and model, or because it's more efficient to enter a known asset ID or scan it, I'll hide the asset list, which then gives me the remainder of the request information. So I'll go back into asset ID and I'll enter our asset details and hit return, and at this point our static information at the top is filled. I have chosen the asset ID of 96214. You'll remember from the Maintain Libraries video, we left that equipment item in the library. And we've got the focus now set in borrower, and our borrower is going to be the physiotherapy department, and if I filter that list, I now get the physiotherapy department details, that's its location, contact number, the supply method is already filled, and our dates are filled here with the request date, the issue date and the return date. So clearly this is for 1 month, this library, and they've already been calculated. We can override these details, and we've got calendar controls to be able to do that. When we selected the borrower, that's the borrower department, it automatically coloured the issued to and set the focus there, coloured it pink, and that then gives us a list of the physiotherapy department staff members. When we choose a staff member, if we choose one that's not trained, so if I choose Paul Kingston at this point, it says the selected staff member isn't trained for this piece of equipment. And you'll remember from the library setup video, in the control file we have a setting for untrained staff action, which enables checking on device training, and the options in the control file were no action, or prevent selection, or as we have here, just giving us a warning. So although we've been warned that he's not trained, we could actually say yes at that point, but I'll say no, and I'll choose a staff member that I know is trained, and that's Marjorie Debney, and it's now accepted that. The remainder items that we would fill, we've got a loan cost, and although that doesn't do anything in the system, it does go into the asset detail form, and it gives us a running total of that piece of equipment, of how much the income would have been, that notional income. So I'll put £25 in there, and we are at a point where we're almost ready to click saved on this record, but we've got a request status here, and our options are awaiting issue, not satisfied, pending, or satisfied. So we know that this is completed and we can satisfy this. The final bit of information, if the piece of equipment was going to a patient address, we would click on yes. If it isn't, we click on no. And if we had a patient reference, we could enter that, any patient details and notes. It's important to point out at this point that if we were putting personal information in there, we would have to consider the fact that this is information that is visible at any time. So we can now click on save, and our loan reference has now been automatically filled and our request has been completed. I won't go to the asset record and show those transactions. There is another video which is about how you audit these transactions and report on them, but that now completes the process of putting a piece of equipment out on loan, and that completes the overview of issuing equipment using the request option in the library module.